When I was a kid, I had this Mermaidia Fairytopia glitter swirl fairy Barbie with big plastic wings that had a glitter liquid in them. You'd press a button on a necklace and a gear in the wings would start spinning to make the glitter liquid circulate. Anyways, whenever I clicked the button, it would make a loud brr sound. Well, I kept my dolls in a plastic container under my bed, and one night I was woken up by my Barbie toy going off with that familiar brr sound. Just so you know, you had to push that button hard and hold it. Naturally, kid me freaked out, and my sister tried to calm me down so I'd go back to sleep. The next morning, I found that same Barbie with its head broken off. Needless to say, I never played with it again, and still to this day don't understand what happened. I shared a bunk bed with my older sister. I had the bottom bunk. Just for scale, I could fit under that bed no problem, even with someone on the bed. There was no way the bed could have pressed on my dolls. The containers were not a tight fit. In fact, it had plenty of room, and this wasn't the first time I'd experienced my toys going off by themselves. However, it was the first time one had been broken. In addition to this, my mom had told me about a time when she was asleep, and she thought I had come into her room because she saw a blonde little girl out of the corner of her eye. I also have blonde hair, hence the confusion. When she turned to see why I was up, she realized it wasn't me and there was no one there. I had also felt the presence of a child, and she would always mess with my toys because I'm guessing we were around the same age at the time. But I didn't really understand that as a kid, and usually just got scared. I still occasionally feel her presence, and sometimes spot blonde hair out of the corner of my eye. I think she's recently been messing with my little nephew's toys now. I posted not too long ago about moving out of a nightmare apartment. We had a house built on the opposite side of town and land. There was nothing but old farmland. I thought I'd done everything right. Even had a rabbi, I was raised Jewish, come and bless the house. It's been about 6 months since we moved in, but it seems like everywhere we go, something keeps happening. I'll highlight the few of the ones that really stick out. This one, I'm really not sure what it even is, but I've seen it 3 times now. It started one night when I first saw this gold light fill the hallway outside my bedroom. I tried to write it off as a trick of the eye or maybe a passing car. A few weeks later, I was sitting in the living room and all of a sudden, the bright golden, almost sparkler-like ball of pure golden light flying. It was flying around my daughter's room and then disappeared down the hallway. The last time I saw it, it was of the exact same appearance, still flying around my daughter's room, but this time being followed or chased by a pitch black ball. It looked like it was trying to flee from whatever was chasing it. So I kept this to myself because I didn't want to startle my wife since it's a new house. But one day, she was telling me about how one morning she was taking the kids to school. In front of the car was a ball of light that looked the same as I described, floating down the road. The next strange occurrence only happened once, but still startled me. I had some weird feeling one night and woke up to see a girl with long dark hair in a white-looking nightgown standing next to my bed, staring at my wife. It moved toward my wife and I blinked. It was gone. I'm a very light sleeper, and any noise in my house will wake me up. On this particular night, I was woken up by what I thought was my daughter screaming. I thought maybe she was having a nightmare, so I got up from my bed, only to see something that still bothers me to this day. Standing in my laundry room was a man in a grey suit. The top of his head was above the doorpost, and he had the most disturbing grin. It was almost a comical-looking smile that went up his face. As soon as I saw him, he began to dissipate, almost as if he was in water and faded away. As he was fading away, I had an intrusive thought enter my head. This idea or thought entered my mind, telling me I was not meant to see him. It wasn't for me. Even now, I feel as if someone is watching us just lurking in the shadows. The next morning, I told my wife about what happened. To my surprise, she responded, "You finally saw him too." She begins to tell me how she keeps seeing the same grinning man. She tells me that she's seen him in the neighbour's yard along the tree line, just standing there watching. When she checked the side mirror to double check what she saw, the mirror was blacked out, almost like a void. It's happened about 6 times now in different places. She also gets these intrusive thoughts, but each time it's the same. "I was waiting for you. I am watching." The more I try to think about it and try to remember the details, I get a migraine. There are other small things that happen, but are not really noteworthy. Every so often, I'll see what looks like a shadow peeking around the corner or moving quickly around the room. I just wish I knew why these things keep happening. We moved to a new state for my job and got this apartment sight unseen. At first, we didn't feel or see anything unusual at first. As time went on, we started noticing a shadow move, or times I thought I kept seeing something move in the kitchen area. I didn't say anything at first to my wife because I didn't want to freak her out. One day, I got a call from her at work that things on our shelf launched off. Then she asked if I had seen anything weird. As time went on, we both started seeing these small shadows move around. We'd see drifting smoke in the apartment with no cause for it. My daughter would scream in the middle of the night or during the day about a ghost scaring her. My son would demand the lights be on at all hours, especially in the kitchen. My wife started waking up in the middle of the night, seeing a shadow man standing in the doorway of our bedroom. Then, our smoke detectors started beeping in one room, stopped, then started in another room. We were finally able to move out. When I was there picking up boxes alone after work, I started hearing the beeping go off in the other room. So I walked around the corner to see a shadow man sitting on the edge of the couch looking at me. I hurried up and got out of there. I returned the next day with my co-worker to pick up the remaining boxes, and when I was leaving, I saw them again, a head peeking around the corner. My wife returned to do a final walkthrough and some last-minute cleaning before turning in the keys. While she was there, a black figure stood in the doorway, pointing towards the door, and a bottle of cleaner launched off the counter. As she was getting ready to leave, all the smoke detectors in the apartment started going off, starting at the back of the apartment and moving towards the door. When she locked the door, they all stopped. First time poster here. I've had this brooding in my mind for years and have to get it out. I can't remember the year exactly. I know I was no older than 10 and I'm 25 now. It was me, my dad and my Mima, at the time staying in the same house, my Mimas. The day was normal, but then night came and I was restless, just couldn't sleep. Right as I started to finally get comfy, I heard my Mima start wailing. Now mind you, she isn't a frail person. At the time she was a corrections officer at the local jail and had just started karate as well. I naturally froze in my room and not knowing what to do until my dad opened my door and told me to come check on her with him. We went down the hall to her room and opened the door, and that's where it got worse. My Mima was still crying out in her sleep and kind of halfway writhing in her bed, and above her in the corner was something I can only describe as darker than dark. It's hard to explain, but it was a dark, solid mass in the shadowy, dark corner of the room, and I remember feeling nothing but absolute terror. This primal instinct is the kind no kid should feel. But when my dad turned on the light, it was gone. Since then, my Mima has had a cross in every room and no incident since. I hadn't thought about it for a while until my dad had brought it up when visiting family once, and I realised it stuck with him too. I'm not overly religious, but I've never had a spirit paranormal experience give me the same fear as this did. it gives me that same fear to think about what I saw and to think why it was attacking my Mima. So this was around 7 years ago, when I was still in the last year of primary school. With a friend of mine, we used to go out and explore and build our base out of twigs, ropes, and planks. Our city is partially elevated on something like a hill, and on the slope of it on the east side, there's a valley with a small river and a forest with a swamp. We've been doing it for a few weeks now, usually in the middle of the day and coming right back as the sun has set. But once we went in the morning at 6 a.m. Everything was pretty normal walking around, collecting twigs, etc. After a few hours when we were chilling to the music, we heard faint whistling. We ignored it, thinking it was some kind of a bird. But in 20 minutes, it started getting louder and closer to us. Even weirder animals, such as foxes and wild homeless dogs, run to the foot of the hill, which was unusual because they never crossed the river at the bottom of the valley, and especially this close to the hill. It was too creepy, and as a frightened 14-year-old, we just started to go uphill slowly, because slippery leaves and overall angle of this slope needed to be taken with care. The noise of whistling was so loud, as if it were just walking up the hill. We got so scared that we just ran uphill, tripping and sliding down on the wet ground without even thinking. As soon as we reached the top, we heard a scream of a woman, like she was right by ourselves. We came back home freaked out, as never before, and gave a break about our base for 2 weeks, so we could settle down our anxiety. We came back to find our base was left intact, and a rosary hung upon a branch of a tree, near the entrance to our hideout. We continued doing our things and it never happened again. So I'm thinking, what do you think it was? There are 2 stories of one hobo rolling down the slope and dying, and one firefighter who tells of his demise, but no story of a woman. So after these years and reminding my friends of this memory, I've decided to stare at it here. Maybe someone had such an experience, or knows something. A few years ago, in my first year of college, I was living in a dormitory apartment with 3 other students. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, 2 people each, a bathroom, and a common room/kitchen. When we finally got all settled, we began to notice strange things occurring. The first occurrence I remember is my roommate standing on the threshold of our bedroom, talking to me through our doorway. I was laying in my bunk facing the door. Suddenly, the door slammed shut between us. The bedroom door's locked from the inside, and I had to get off the bunk to open the door to let her inside. Both of us were shocked, but shrugged it off and ignored it as wind. Throughout the rest of the year, doors, particularly the bedroom doors, would slam shut on their own, or shut while we were in the bathroom/kitchen/class, locking us out of our rooms and forcing us to call maintenance to allow us into our own bedrooms. Within the month, I began to receive scratches, almost looked like the small cat scratches, on my arms and legs while I was sleeping. They always occurred in threes, like claw marks. Small stuff would move on its own or disappear, like pens, books, cooking utensils, etc. Over Christmas break, I had a handful of coins for laundry stolen, and my roommates swore they didn't touch it. On move-out day, I found the coins in our bathroom closet behind the rolls of toilet paper. My roommates also installed speakers in our common room to create a surround sound effect for our TV. The speakers would turn off and on their own, and one night while we were cooking dinner, all 3 simultaneously emitted a high-pitched screeching noise, like microphone feedback, which sent us all running to our rooms terrified. The oven would also be found turned on, which one roommate continuously blamed me for, despite me knowing that I had turned it off when I was finished cooking. Around this time, I also began to feel extreme melancholy, almost depressed. I began to dread going back to the apartment after class, And when I was there, I would do nothing but sleep and eat once a day. When I left the apartment, I felt and acted completely normal. But once in the apartment, I would become extremely depressed, like a cloud was hanging over me. Towards the middle of the semester, one of the girls in the other bedrooms and I decided to switch rooms, and she took over my old bunk. She also began to wake up with scratches and told me she began to feel very depressed in the apartment as well. So much so that only 2 months after moving into my old bunk, she secretly moved in with her boyfriend in a separate dorm, despite the $500 fine from the college if she was found out. Both of us also experienced several occasions where we would feel like we had our hair tugged, being poked, or had our covers pulled on while we were laying in that bunk trying to sleep. The one and only time I was alone there, I felt like a trapped animal. I was huddled on my bunk for over an hour, experiencing an overwhelming instinctual need to hide, and feeling fear like something was standing in the doorway, physically threatening me. My heart was hammering for over an hour, like my body and subconscious knew there was some danger there I couldn't see. The relief I felt when I finally left an hour later was unlike anything I had ever felt before. The reason I finally decided to post this is because a few days ago, nearly 5 years later, I've come to find out that a student who had previously lived in that room over a decade ago killed herself over the winter break and was discovered 4 days after her suicide. This story happened when I was around 9 or 10, staying at my grandparents' house. It was late at night and I was trying to get to sleep. My sister, who was sleeping in the same room, was currently asleep, but I wasn't tired. At this age, I wasn't allowed technology, so I had no phone or iPad to pass the time, and I wasn't tired enough to fall asleep. For some reason, probably because I was very bored, I decided to look out of the window. Out of the window is my grandparents' back garden, which is long and thin and stretches quite far back. As I looked out the window, I could see a figure of a woman standing at the bottom of the garden. She looked very strange and looked like she was glowing. I was so scared, I quickly closed the curtain and started to panic as I was very young and didn't know what to do. I sat up in bed very frightened, but wasn't sure what I had just seen. For some reason, I was compelled again to look out the window, so I slowly moved the curtain aside and looked out. And the woman had now moved further down the garden towards the window and was looking up at me. I was so frightened, I jumped away from the window and put my pillow over her face. I know that I did not dream this, as I never fell asleep after this point, and lay there with the pillow on my face, because I was sure if I looked out, she would be in the room with me. I waited all night, scared shitless, until my grandpa came in with water and toast in the morning. I never told anyone, and I honestly don't believe that ghosts can exist, but I know for a fact I saw this. I'm very conflicted, but thought I'd share my story. So you know the acrobat and the flea, right? I nodded as my brother, standing in the living room, delivered me his presentation. He was 16 and one of the smartest people I've ever met. That being said, he was also reckless, and sometimes his curiosity and crazy theories got the best of him. Imagine a tightrope, he said, stretching a piece of thread between his hands as a visual aid. The acrobat, he continued, can only move in two directions, back and forth. I nodded again, starting to wonder what he was getting at. The flea, however, has two additional directions: forward, back, left, and right. This is seen as a metaphor, an aid for our understanding per se, for just how much we cannot get to yet. We are the acrobat in this plane of reality. I nodded along again. But that's exactly what my question is. What if we had the ability to move like a flea? I shook my head. Damien, there's no way. But there is, he continued enthusiastically. dramatically beginning to write on the whiteboard he had brought in with him. It requires a great deal of chemical knowledge, however, and has taken me about a year to research to get it to work. But I think it's finally ready, he rambled, not looking up from his writing. He finally capped the marker he was writing with and turned to face me. He had drawn a diagram on the whiteboard, illustrating his project. I didn't understand any of it. Basically, atoms like to fuse with other atoms to make compounds. But what if we utilise this to get places, he continued. He was delusional, I was sure of it. For example, oxygen likes to fuse with oxygen to make O2. It's just the way it works. They need to share electrons to be stable, and they usually bind to the closest oxygen in proximity. Yeah, I know how it works. I took chem in high school, I said. But what are you getting at? He paused and said his next words in nearly a whisper. I figured out how to teleport, Maria, he said as he leaned in. His words were laced with an almost sense of childlike wonder, like a kindergartner who had found a cool rock and was showing it to his friends. How? I queried, my eyes widening with wonder. Had he really? What if, instead of atoms bonding with the ones close to them that stabilise them, they bond as we choose them to, with which ones we choose them to? He began to point to the pictures in the diagram he had drawn. Now, of course, they have to stabilise each other electron-wise. There's no controlling that. But I figured out a way to choose, for example, which oxygen bonds to which oxygen. I nodded. For this experiment, I used specifically water molecules, H2O, because the bonds they form aren't too hard to build and break, and they're quite abundant. I raised my hand timidly. My brother was 3 years younger than me, and it was kind of amusing that I was so confused by what he was saying. So sorry, I know I'm kind of rambling, and you look confused. To put it in the simplest way possible, I can take a hydrogen atom from my body and force it to bond with another hydrogen and an oxygen anywhere in the world, causing me, by some occurrence I can't exactly explain, to be taken with it, forming an H2O at the secondary location. But it works, and that's all I need to know. Have you tried it yet? I just told you if it works. Of course I've tried it, he scoffed. Show me, I ushered. He sighed. If I must, skeptic, he said jokingly. I don't know how he did it, but almost instantaneously he appeared on the other side of the room. Ta-da! I was beyond shocked. I was bewildered. There's no way, I stuttered. There is, my dear sister, and I discovered it. So how do you get it to work? He paused. I don't know. I kind of just do it, he shrugged. I picture the atoms bonding, and it happens. Thoughts were racing in my mind at 100 miles a minute. Do you realize how powerful that is? I asked hesitantly. He thought for a minute. No, I don't. Holy shit. He looked me in the eyes and then shouted excitedly. Holy shit, he smiled and jumped up and down with joy. He touched his head and made crazy hand gestures as he went on. I figured out how to control matter. I smiled. I was happy for him, but this whole thing was surreal. It wasn't right. All I wanted to do was teleport and... He paused, speechless from his own excitement. This is awesome, he squealed again. He blipped out of the room in the blink of an eye, and then I heard him yell from the other side of the house, I'm over here! Then the whiteboard disappeared. I followed his voice, and I found him outside, once again in awe. I watched him examine the whiteboard. As I looked closer at what he was analysing, I noticed a chunk of stuff fused to the back of the whiteboard. What's going on? I asked. It looks like, because the chemical compounds are more difficult to break and build, it did it the easiest way, and this mass formed. Why? He thought harder before answering my question. It didn't just make simple water. The molecules in it are more complex. I shrugged. It's curious. I'll have to research it more, he muttered, before breaking into a smile again. The next day, I woke up to my alarm and walked out into the kitchen to get some water. Boo! Damien shouted from behind me. He wasn't there before. I see you're enjoying your discovery, I commented, playfully nudging him. Before I knew it, my nudge had caused him to lose his balance. He cried out in pain and he laid on the floor. Oh my God, are you okay? I'm so sorry, I frantically apologised and bent over to help him up. Only he didn't get up. He winced and then looked at me, tears in his eyes. It hurts. Then I noticed his foot was stuck in the floor. That's what had caused him to lose his balance, and now the bones stuck out at a grotesque angle. Maria, call 911 or something. It hurts, oh my God, he moaned in pain. I hastily picked up my phone and dialed 911, and I sat next to my brother, clutching his hand until the emergency crew arrived. What the? The paramedic stopped short as he went to examine Damien's leg, upon noticing his foot had clipped into the floor like a video game glitch. I'm stuck, he cried. The paramedic radioed in the fire department to try to get Damien out. Can you just unbond them or something? He gritted his teeth and shook his head. No, I can only make bonds. He let out another scream of pain, beginning to hyperventilate. The paramedic turned back around to face us and clipped his radio back into his belt. Damien didn't pass out until the EMT rolled up his pant leg and he saw his bone. I even got nauseous looking at it, and I could feel his pain. How did this happen? The fire department arrived with saws and other tools and chopped up the floor in order to get my brother out. His foot was still intact, but his leg was now broken because some molecules didn't form the right way, as he explained to me after he woke up in the hospital. He'll have to be non-weight-bearing for about 2 months, as that was a pretty nasty break, the doctor explained. Say, how did you get stuck in a perfectly intact floor like that anyway? He queried. My brother shrugged. He was discharged 3 days later, having a stay in the hospital for a few nights due to the break needing surgery to repair. When our parents heard about it, they considered cutting their trip short, but my brother argued with them over the phone and insisted that he would be fine, so they didn't. Over the next few days, Damien was getting better. He wasn't as tired and grumpy, and he was in slightly less pain than before. I decided to bring breakfast into his room, and as I opened the door, the tray disappeared straight out of my hands and appeared in his lap. Damien, he grinned. You don't have to wait on me. I can do that all by myself now. But what about your accident? What if something else happens? That teleporting thing doesn't seem very sensible. You worry too much. I'll be fine, he said, through a mouthful of the eggs I made. I left him to his own devices and decided to watch TV. I was hours into a rewatch of The Office when I heard Damien call my name. I followed his voice to the bathroom, and I found him standing on his crutches and looking in the mirror. Maria, he mumbled. Yes? Something's wrong, he said meekly, turning to face me. I looked at him in shock, and I saw what had happened. Giant masses of stuff protruded from his head and body, like it had on the whiteboard. I could make out a PlayStation controller lodged between his eyes, and a chunk of the console and wires dangling out of his chest. There were no wounds either. It was terrifying. I just wanted to play some video games, so I summoned my controller, and... His eyes started to fill with tears. I don't know how to undo all of this. Oh my God, do you want me to take you to the hospital? I asked him, my entire body shaking with anxiety. I was looking at my brother, who was now a mangled mess of random matter, and I didn't know what to do. No, they won't know how to fix it. I'm going to try it myself. He shut his eyes and concentrated hard, but nothing happened. In fact, it got worse. The masses grew bigger, and my brother began to fade away. He won't come out of the bathroom. Every time I go to check on him, it's worse. I try talking to him, but he's just not there anymore. It's almost like the extra matter made him a zombie. I don't know what to do. My parents won't know what to do, and neither will the hospital. Even the kid who made the discovery, my genius brother, doesn't know how to reverse it. And the masses of matter just keep getting bigger. The bathroom door has started to bow outwards, and soon it will break and the masses will grow into the hallway and the rest of the house. I don't know how far it will go. All I know is that my brother is still in there, trying desperately to make it go away. But alas, it only gets bigger. I don't know how big it's going to get, and my brother won't listen to my pleading for him to stop. Everyone knows about that stupid trend on Twitter, texting your neighbour number, the phone number one away from yours. Many of my real life friends and online friends were doing the challenge, some getting funny results, and some making new friends, and some just not getting answered at all. So I thought, what's the harm in trying? I sat on my couch and punched in the number that was one higher than mine and sent a message. Me, hey number neighbour, what's up? And I sat back and waited for a reply. It was hours before I received anything back, and I wasn't too disappointed. I wasn't expecting anything anyway. Then, at exactly midnight, my phone went off. Unknown. Hey number neighbour, I can see you. I sat up in my bed and read it again. I can see you? What? My phone went off again. Unknown. Why are you ignoring me, number neighbour? I didn't reply. Unknown. Do you want to talk now? I can see you're scared. I'm outside your window. My eyes widened as I read the last message. It couldn't be true, right? It was probably just to scare me. Either way, I was checking my window. I had my phone in my hand with 911 on the speed dial in case something happened. I turned on my flashlight and cast it around the darkness outside the window. Finding nothing, as I suspected. It was just a joke. My phone went off again. Unknown. Wrong window. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest as I went to check the other windows. Nothing. I decided to block the number to spare myself a lot of much unneeded anxiety, as I could see that my number neighbour most likely wasn't going to be a friend. I fell asleep for a while after that, only to be awoken by thunder. It was raining. I looked out my window and listened to the soft pitter-patter of the rain as I tried to fall back asleep. Then I saw something. It was in a split second when lightning flashed. A figure in my window. A humanoid figure with long arms and legs and smooth white skin. They had holes for their eyes and were smiling. Right next to them was a message written in window fog. I guess you didn't want to play, huh? Then it was gone. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I moved to the living room and watched TV to distract myself from what I had just seen. It had to be a misconception. Only it wasn't. For the rest of the night I sat in the living room, paranoid out of my mind, flinching at every sound. I dozed off briefly, only to be awakened again by scratching at my door. I did the smart thing and I didn't check it out. It was probably just a tree. I checked back in my room the next morning, and the message was still there. I guess you didn't want to play, huh? I can still hear sounds in my house at night, like someone is crawling around. I don't know if I should call the police or not. I don't know if they'll believe me. I recently moved to this city on the east coast of the US called Cedarville. I'm typing this because I honestly have no idea what's going on. Let me tell the story. After years of living in a quite boring suburban area, I thought moving to a city would be a nice change of scenery. After all, I enjoy being on the move and having a lot to do, and I've always found cities being able to satisfy the constant need for stimulation. When I was house hunting, I found the perfect apartment. Perfectly in my price range and everything. I didn't know where I expected to be, but Cedarville was never anywhere close to being on my list of guesses. First of all, I'd never even heard of the place. So I decided to drive there to look around before placing a bid on the apartment. I wasn't expecting a huge metropolitan area. It was at least the size of Philadelphia, if not larger, which was a little bit confusing considering I've never heard of it before today. I've never seen it mentioned on a map, and when you search it on Google Earth to find satellite pictures, nothing comes up, which is puzzling considering the size of the area. So after visiting, I decided the site was pretty nice and I placed my bid. A week later, I got a phone call saying I got the apartment. I was eager to move in, but the one thing that still bothered me was work. I was 3 years out of medical school, having completed my internship for general surgery and diagnosis at a hospital in my old city. I was now free to practice on my own. After doing some research, I found that the Cedarville General Hospital was looking for staff, and I decided to apply. Here's when things started to turn what the actual fuck weird. The hospital, to start, is the only healthcare building in the entire city. No specialist offices, no private practices, no clinics, just the hospital. Secondly, it's the dead centre of the city, like the geographic centre of the map. It's not the largest building, but it's definitely not the smallest. It's a beautiful building, modern architecture and such, so it's not too old. Which makes me wonder how the fuck it was the dead centre of the city. The hospital layout is divided into wings named after the cardinal directions: north, south, east and west. Not that weird, right? Well, turns out none of the wings correspond to the actual directions that they're placed in. The north wing is on the south side of the building, the west on the east, and vice versa. Probably the result of some poor old sap's shitty planning, but who the fuck knows anymore? My interview was also quite different. The hospital's director just hired me. I didn't have to give him my resume. I didn't have to answer questions about myself. And quite possibly the weirdest part was that I never gave him a transcript of my job history and education. And somehow he had it. He had a copy of my degree and my medical license, despite me never giving him one. Freaky shit, but I was just relieved that I got the job. The kinds of questions he asked gave me the creeps too. I mentioned beforehand that he didn't ask me things about myself. There was stuff like, have you ever been in a government position? Or, if your spouse and your best friend were drowning, who would you save? Basically, not normal job interview questions, to say the least. This guy seemed normal, but I swear to God, during our meeting, his eyes disappeared for a split second. During my first few weeks, I was also introduced to some strange employee rituals. Firstly, at exactly 12 noon every day, a tone would play over the intercom, and about half of the doctors and nurses would mindlessly walk to the 5th floor and scream. Just endlessly scream for 5 minutes straight. This was called scream time, and it was voluntary. There were also some weird rules about scream time. You must be on the 5th floor to participate. If you're not already, drop what you're doing and go. No one cares if you're in the middle of open heart surgery. Go. If participating, you must scream for exactly 5 minutes. Any less, you're fired. Any more, you're fired. That's it. I never participated in screen time, but some of my co-workers did. They never remember participating when asked about it. If you're going to have coffee, you must finish. Not too weird, probably just to cut down on waste. But the thing that makes me question it is that if they really wanted to cut down on waste, they'd have the same rule for the cafeteria. They didn't. It was just for coffee. Another rule was that you had to carry a pen, and you only got one. Not two, not zero. It was a company-supplied pen. You must have at least one pen on your person at all times, unless performing surgery. Kind of annoying and weird, but not really a problem for me. Other than those few what the fuck things, the rest of the employee code of conduct was normal, as it would be at any other medical facility. The floors and rooms occasionally change locations. The other day, I was called to the north wing or on the fourth floor. The elevator took me to the sixth floor, in the west wing. The room was there, labelled as being in the north wing on the fourth floor. The cafeteria changes its location from day to day. The ER is never in the same wing as it was the day before. No one can ever find the third floor's east wing, despite it showing up on the maps and the custodian insisting that he's just cleaned it. The bathrooms only show up when you need them and then disappear after. I still don't have an explanation for this. Some of the floors of the Cedarville General also have their weird quirks. Floor 7 has 3 elevators instead of 2 like the rest. No one knows where the third one leads, and no one has ever tried using it. On floor 8, which no one uses, you can wander around in the dark while faint carnival music plays throughout the whole south wing, perpetually. No one knows where it comes from or why it's there. There's no electricity on floor 8. There were no light bulbs on floor 8, only windows. Floor 6 changes colour every day. One day the walls are blue, the next they're yellow. Floor 4 is missing. It looks like it's there from the outside, but there's no way to access it, which could explain why I was transported to the 6th floor when I tried to go there. Patients on floor 5 somehow end up lost. When you look for them, they appear directly behind you and ask what you're looking for. The people that work here and get treated here are equally weird as well. I once saw my co-worker tuck a rogue tentacle into his sleeve and then look around to make sure no one saw. I saw. I know your secret, Mark. There are these 3 old ladies that come in together once every week for dialysis. I've never treated them myself, but I have taken their vitals before. They are identical triplets. Their charts say they were born in 1906. And how identical triplets as much as survived in 1906 is beyond me. Also, due to some insanely unlucky genetic anomaly, none of them have eyes. They do, however, have one prosthetic that they pass around from day to day. Every time they come in, a different one has the eye. I've seen them arguing over it before. I don't know why. Occasionally, I'll see a person who looks exactly like me at the end of one of the corridors. However, I can only see them in my peripheral vision. If I turn to look, they disappear. We once had a patient come into the ER with appendicitis. We rush him into the OR for an emergency appendectomy, knock him out the usual. All of a sudden, about 20 minutes in, he starts screaming. The brain activity monitors still showed that he was unconscious. The heart monitor showed us a resting pulse. He was out. There was no explanation for why he was screaming, and it continued until we were finished. He woke up and we interrogated him about it, asked him if he possibly felt anything. He said no. I had a little girl and her mother come in for routine vaccinations. She was sitting on the table and her mom was in a chair in the corner. The door of the room was closed. I took her vitals and such, then I turned around to prepare the injections, and upon turning back around, the mother and the girl were gone. They disappeared into thin air. I whipped back around to look at the girl's chart, and it too was gone. I checked the system for a name, and it said she doesn't exist. She wasn't dead. There was just no result. Possibly the weirdest case yet was just the other day. We had a 10-year-old boy come in with a severely broken arm. When I say severe, I mean completely obliterated. He was probably going to have it amputated. It was flopping all over the place, with the bones pounded into sawdust. He had got it caught beneath a boulder while hiking and needed to be flown in. Anyway, we were just finishing up imaging the arm and processing the gruesome x-rays when I turned around and saw the kid using his phone, playing a game, with his broken arm that had somehow miraculously healed itself. We asked him a few questions. He said he felt fine. We showed him the x-ray images and told him what was going on. He simply said, "That's not my arm." and went back to his game. Then he passed out. We took his vitals and his heart rate was dropping quickly. After multiple resuscitation attempts, we declared him dead. I went to inform the parents when I was stopped mid-sentence by something tugging on my sleeve. It was the kid. The kid who I just pronounced dead stood behind me asking, "What are we talking about? I'm right here." Aside from the occasional weird case, the rest are pretty normal. Now, here's the part that freaks me out the most. Yesterday, I was paged to the ER. I went the normal way to get there, but I didn't end up there. The damn place was probably moved again for all I know, but usually I end up there anyway. Anyway, the area I was in was unfamiliar. You'd think after working here for a few weeks I'd have seen everything, but alas. I looked around and found that the corridor I was in was labelled Southwest Wing. This struck my interest because I've reviewed all the maps and floor plans of this godforsaken place, and I've never seen a Southwest Wing mentioned. I was in an area of the hospital that didn't exist. I wandered on for a while, exploring the newly found area, when my gut suddenly dropped with the worst feeling ever. I got the chills, and my spine tingled. I knew I shouldn't be here. All of the rooms in the Southwest Wing had heavy-duty locks. I decided to poke around. Walking further on, I passed a room that had the door open and I peeked in, making sure I wouldn't be noticed. What I saw was the most disturbing image I've ever seen. It was a human, or what looked to be one, but it was just a torso with arms. Think arms for legs, and one for the head, on top of the existing set of arms. I gasped, and the thing noticed and scuttled towards the door. I bolted down the hallway as I heard the door slam. I looked over my shoulder, and I was relieved to be alone. As I wandered around trying to retrace my steps and find the way I came in, the hallways kept rearranging so I could never find the same place twice. As the corridors stretched onward, a foul smell started emanating from all around. It smelled like necrotic skin, but worse. I gagged, then fished around my pocket for the surgical mask I stuffed in there earlier, and put it on in a feeble attempt to block out the smell. As I turned to the corner, I saw double doors that opened into what looked to be a huge operating room. I saw 3 of what I assumed to be humans in hazmat suits wheeling a gurney into that room. Once glanced in my direction, and I quickly ducked around the corner to avoid being seen. I didn't see what they had on that gurney, and I didn't really want to, so I ran. I ran until I eventually ended up near the ER, where I was supposed to be half an hour ago. My co-worker Mark saw me out of breath. "What happened to you?" he asked with a laugh. I couldn't find any words. "Sorry I'm late," I said. "What do you mean?" He looked puzzled. "I got lost." He looked at me with a confused expression and pointed at the clock on the wall. It was still 1:30. I could have sworn I was in the Southwest Wing for at least 30 minutes. It should have been 2 o'clock. I don't know what the fuck is going on in Cedarville General. I used to consider myself a logical person, well versed in sciences, scoffing and rolling my eyes whenever someone brought up magic or conspiracies. If something didn't have a scientific explanation, then it wasn't true. I'm not so sure of that anymore. After weeks of working at Cedarville General, I was sure I couldn't see anything weirder, until this homeless guy started hanging around. At least, we think he's a homeless guy. He started hanging around in front of the hospital, playing the ukulele. Also, he's jacked as fuck. He's got the body of someone who goes to the gym every day, and he walks around shirtless. He's also pretty well groomed, with his mop of blonde curls, and he always wears Ray-Bans, which is quite unusual for a homeless guy. So yeah, he's a total Chad. I went out there the other day to ask him if he needed anything, why he was here, etc. He stood up and told me that he owned the building. Okay, I was skeptical, of course. Then homeless Chad pointed to me, tipped his sunglasses down and said, "You do good work," and smiled. Alrighty. I decided to leave him alone and go back inside. The old ladies visited again. This time they asked their nurse to see me, which was unusual. I don't do dialysis, and I didn't even think they knew my name. I walked into their room, and the middle one immediately pointed at me. She had the eye. "None of the other people that work here give me the same feeling you do," she whispered, her finger wiggling in my face. "What do you mean? What do you see?" "Excuse me?" The lady on the right piped in. "What do you see when you look at her?" I hesitated, not knowing what to say. "You're identical triplets, and you all share one glass eye," I asked, very confused. I heard murmuring coming from the group. The lady on the left started talking. "Do you have your pen?" she asked. Yes," I said, fishing around the pockets of my coat and producing the company-issued pen for her to see. She looked at it. "Curious," she mumbled. "Be careful," she said, pointing at me again. A moment later, I left the room, confused by the interaction I'd just had. What did they mean? I didn't have any patients today, so I decided to wander around for a while to maybe try to find where the cafeteria was stationed itself today. I walked past the janitor and I said good morning. His jaw dropped as he looked at me, as if he were surprised by something. He then continued to mop. One thing I noticed about the janitor that gave me creeps was that his feet were not on the ground. He was hovering 4 inches off the floor. There was some kind of animal in his bucket that I elected to ignore. I decided that it was just the water from the mop distorting the picture, but I couldn't convince myself 100%. I arrived at the cafeteria and found Kayla, the nurse I work with most of the time. I casually brought up the fact that the janitor was floating. She insisted we didn't have a janitor. A few hours passed when I was called into the ER. There was a teenage boy in there with 2 broken legs. Now, you may be asking, why did I say 2 broken legs instead of both? The reason being, he had 4. He had a horse's body. I did a double take, and his legs were human again. He had 2. We also had a middle-aged man come in holding what looked to be another person's severed arms, and asked us to reattach them. His pair was intact. My assistant insisted that he had lost both of his arms, and didn't even have the severed ones with him. A ton of other weird shit happened that day. I was on the 7th floor, and I saw homeless Chad pop up on the 3rd elevator. The extra elevator. That one doesn't lead anywhere. He sprinted to the window and threw himself out of it. Everyone gasped as they saw him hit the ground, 7 stories below. One lady screamed and cried about how his limbs were twisted in the wrong directions and such. Exasperated, I looked out the window. I saw him get up and flash a thumbs up back at us. Still no explanation for this. The lady talked about how ambulances showed up and they failed to resuscitate him. I saw him walk away, uninjured. The 5th floor west wing disappeared while I was at it. I was getting ready to scrub in for a surgery when the room just disappeared. And suddenly, I was on the 3rd floor. After I got off work around 6 o'clock that day, I decided to go to my apartment and write down the patterns I saw with the floors. Floor 1 was the least weird. The receptionist seems a little sketchy, but everything on that floor stays within that floor when it moves. The ER only moves wings, and so do the exam rooms. The only thing that still freaks me out is the southwest wing, which I haven't encountered since the first time. Floor 2 was where I usually encountered the doppelganger. The doppelganger is the name I've given to the entity that I occasionally catch mimicking my appearance. They always show up at the end of the longest corridor, and I can only see them in my peripheral vision. Everything else about floor 2 is absolutely normal. The rooms don't even move like the rest of the hospital. Floor 3's entire east wing is missing. It's just not there. Floor 4 is missing. Floor 5 is where patients go missing, and it's also where scream time happens. Floor 6 changes colour. Unlike the other floors that only change layout, this floor changes colour. Sometimes the walls are purple, sometimes they're grey. Floor 7 has the extra elevator. I saw homeless Chad use it once. I haven't seen any other activity from it. None of the other floors have 3 elevators. Floor 8 is the top floor, and the creepiest. There's no electricity on floor 8, yet somehow you can hear carnival music flowing evenly through the air, with no fluctuations in volume or anything. No one uses floor 8. I know I probably shouldn't, even after what those ladies told me this morning, but I want to attempt to find the southwest wing again. So as you probably all know by now, if you've read my previous entries, I'm in a pretty fucking weird situation. In case you haven't read the other parts, to sum it up, I started working at the weirdest hospital ever. The building's weird, the patients are weird, it's just all round weird. After contemplating it for a while, I decided to let myself get some sleep, because the next day, I was going to stay for night shift. The whole day leading up to the night shift was strange, so normal I guess. Homeless Chad winked and threw a finger gun at me as I walked past him. The receptionist had bat wings today. There was a teenage boy in the ER that needed sutures for a large laceration on his arm. Sounds pretty normal. The only thing off was that his blood was gold. I caught the doppelganger off guard and finally got a good look. They looked exactly like me. About 5'4", female, curly blonde hair, even styled the same as mine. And they even got the locations of my birthmarks correct. The only difference was the eyes. The doppelganger had those piercing green eyes. Mine are blue. This was all I got to take in before they inevitably disappeared. The 6th floor was pink today. I was assisting with a cesarean today. The woman receiving it birthed a baby boy with goat legs. She wasn't a goat and didn't even look to be part goat. Her child was. The head surgeon asked me why I looked so shocked. I didn't say anything. The old ladies came in for their dialysis again, and I can't believe I didn't think anything about it possibly not being dialysis, but something different. I've been wondering how they're almost 120 years old, with no caregivers, supposedly poor health, and doing perfectly fine. I'm beginning to have a hypothesis about pens. One of you suggested that the reason the employees are forced to carry pens is because they block out the weirdness, which would explain why none of my co-workers notice it. But why do I see all this shit? Anyway, let's get away from the day's happenings and into the nights. I clocked in for night shift around 6:30 and went about my duties as normal. That is, until it got dark. I was on the 1st floor, crossing the lobby, when I immediately noticed something was different. Right in the centre of the lobby was a staircase, a spiral one to be exact, straight through the centre of the room. I looked up, and there looked to be a landing on every floor. I looked down at it, and it seemed to spiral all the way down to God knows what. Maybe a sub-basement? I had so many questions. What the hell was at the bottom? Was there possibly a landing on the missing 4th floor? I stepped away from the stairs when I noticed the receptionist staring at me. "You shouldn't see that," she growled. Her eyes were glowing. "I was just passing through, ma'am," I said, putting my hands up and backing away in the opposite direction. I didn't have any patience, so I decided to go up to the 8th floor. Maybe I could access the mysterious staircase. The elevator stopped and let me off at the 8th floor, but it was different than usual. To start, there was light. It was about 9:30 at night, so there was no natural light pouring in through the windows, but there was light. I looked to the staircase, and it seemed to spiral all the way up out of the ceiling. What the fuck? I whispered to myself. I stepped on the stairs and began my descent, hoping maybe to end up on the 4th floor. I arrived at the 4th floor, and there it was, the missing floor. It was a nicer area of the hospital, and it seemed a lot newer than the rest of the place somehow. Homeless Chad was sitting in the chair in the middle of one of the waiting areas, reading. "What are you doing here?" I asked him. "I told you, I own the building." "What even is this floor?" "'Tis my hangout," he said. "Do we treat any patients here?" "Occasionally, the odd god or demigod will come through here," he said, casually. I'd pretty much accepted at this point that Chad was not human, but I had even more questions. "Where are the employees?" "It's just me, baby," he said. I looked at his shirtless torso and bare feet and decided there was no way. "Who are you?" "The god of healing." "How can I trust that that's true?" I asked. He snapped his fingers. "Take a look under the band-aid on your forearm and tell me what your cat scratch looks like." How did he know I got scratched by my cat earlier? I rolled up my sleeve and ripped off the band-aid to reveal that the scratch was gone. Well, if you can do that, then why do you hire doctors here? That scratch was nothing. I can only do so much. Some cases require the talents of a mortal, and so far, you're the most talented I've seen in a while. "Psh, please, I'm average," I said modestly. "You reattached that guy's arms earlier with no problem, and he's fine now." I shrugged. I was still skeptical, but this guy definitely wasn't the weirdest thing I'd come across at this place. I decided to press him more. "What's your name?" "Apollo." "Where does the staircase go?" "All the way down to the underworld, and all the way up to Olympus." What is this place? A hub for the healthcare needs of all myths, legends, and the generally abnormal. Why am I here? I'm human. He looked at me and sighed. "No, you're not." "What?" "You wouldn't be able to see me if you were. You still have your pen, which is supposed to act as a mist to block mortals here from seeing the weird. You still can, despite it." "Then what am I?" "You think I know?" "Well, you are a god, right? You should know." "You're probably one of my kids, for all I know." "You mean you don't keep track of them?" "Nah. I have so many one-night stands that I can't count them, so it's quite plausible." I was too focused on asking him the one question that burned into me, that I didn't even seem too fazed by all the talk about gods and myths. I didn't even seem fazed by the possibility of this guy being my father. Maybe I was just desensitized to the weirdness. Who knows? I asked him the question. "What's the southwest wing?" He looked puzzled. "What?" he asked. "The southwest wing." "There's no such thing as the southwest wing," he said, looking at me like I was crazy. I stuck my hands in my pockets out of discomfort. "Are you sure? I stumbled upon this area the other day, and it was labelled as the southwest wing. I thought maybe you'd know what it was." "There's no such thing. I designed this building. I would know." The fact that he designed the building to purposely fuck with people was slightly entertaining. But the fact that even this little god didn't even know what the southwest wing was terrifying. My radio crackled with the announcement that I was needed in the ER, so I had to wrap up my conversation with Apollo/Chad. The ER is even weirder at night. First of all, at night, no efforts were made to conceal any of the weirdness. Apparently, mortals didn't work the night shift. The other doctors and nurses on night shift all had their quirks. One nurse floated and could control the water. One doctor was a centaur. Yes, a centaur. Not even sanitary. One patient claimed to be the son of a war god when I asked him how his legs were sawed off. The situation had nothing to do with the battle. He deliberately sawed them off. We luckily got them reattached. I think he was just crazy. I encountered what I thought was a dragon. Some of you suggested that this hospital is for Greek myths, but a lot of the things I've encountered have no mythological counterpart. Among all things at night, The staircase piques my interest the most. Monsters and God knows what keep coming out the bottom, and one of the two deities came from the top. Everything else came through the front. Most were humanoid. Some were different monsters and such, but they were all quite kind when you treated them. We had a few normal humans at night, just like during the day, but none of them paid attention to the weird stuff. I am so not used to this, and I don't think I ever will get used to it. But for now, I treat myths and legends at Cedarville General. I still have yet to figure out what the Southwest Wing is, but I've begun trying to figure out how to access it again. It still scares me extremely, but I'm just too curious. It's almost like I can't live without knowing.